The rain had turned the Colorado sky into a gray, brooding canvas as Liam Westbrook sped down the winding mountain road, his luxury black Mercedes slicing through the storm like a phantom. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, knuckles pale, heart heavy with the silence that followed the hospital's final word. Sterile. The word echoed louder in his head than the thunder rolling overhead. Billionaire CEO of Westbrook Enterprises, celebrated by Forbes, feared by his rivals. Liam had everything except the one thing that made life feel remotely human: a family. His engagement had crumbled months ago when his fiancée left him after learning the truth about his condition. Since then, Liam had become more machine than man, emotionless, unreachable, ticking off business deals like lines on a spreadsheet, suffocating under the weight of perfection. But tonight, something cracked. The storm outside mirrored the one raging inside his chest. As he took a sharp turn, a sudden flash of headlights and a truck skidding in the opposite lane sent him spiraling out of control. Tires screeched, metal screamed, and in an instant, his car slammed into a tree and flipped twice before crashing to a halt against a ditch. Blood trickled from his forehead, and everything blurred into black. Time stood still. Minutes passed, or hours. He didn't know. But then, through the fog of pain and unconsciousness, he felt warmth. A voice, panicked but gentle, calling for him to wake up. Harper Quinn had just finished a double shift at Mercy General Hospital, exhausted and soaked from the downpour, when she saw the wreck on the roadside. Her instincts kicked in before fear could. She didn't hesitate. Her heels sank into the mud as she sprinted across the wet ground. Rain whipped against her cheeks as she yanked open the crumpled door. Smoke curled from under the hood, and the car smelled of gasoline and burning wires. "Hey, stay with me," she cried, her hands trembling as she checked his pulse. She didn't know this man, but she recognized the pale skin, the suit stained with blood, and the raw fragility of a life hanging by a thread. With a grunt, she unbuckled him and pulled him out just seconds before the engine hissed and burst into flames behind them. Her knees scraped the gravel as she cradled his head, pressing a cloth to his bleeding temple, dialing 911 with her free hand. When the paramedics arrived, she stayed, holding an umbrella over his unconscious form, as though protecting a stranger mattered more than her own safety. At the hospital, she didn't leave his side. Not when they wheeled him into emergency surgery, not when the nurses whispered about who he was, the billionaire who rarely showed his face in public. She didn't care. To her, he was just a man who had almost died. The next morning, Liam woke slowly, vision hazy, head pounding. The first thing he saw wasn't a doctor or a monitor. It was Harper, sitting silently in the corner chair, her clothes still damp from the night before. He stared, confusion crawling across his features. "Who are you?" he asked hoarsely. She looked up, smiled softly. "The girl who dragged you out of a burning car." He blinked. "Why?" Harper stood, brushing hair from her face. "Because you were going to die, and I couldn't let that happen." Liam didn't know what to say. Gratitude wasn't a language he spoke often. He had paid for survival many times, with top doctors, private jets, personal trainers, but no one had ever saved him simply because they cared. His assistant Cole arrived hours later, jaw tight when he saw Harper. "She's the one who saved you," he muttered, then offered her a blank check. Harper declined it instantly. "I didn't do it for money." Liam was stunned. In his world, everything had a price. But she didn't want cars, jewels, or headlines. She just asked if he'd be okay. And then she left, quietly without waiting for applause. But Liam couldn't stop thinking about her. Who was this woman? Why had she risked everything for a stranger? And why, for the first time in years, did his chest ache not from pain, but from something dangerously close to longing? That night, as he lay alone in the hospital bed, staring at the storm still lingering outside the window, Liam Westbrook realized something terrifying. His life had been spared, but maybe not for the reasons he once believed. Liam stared out of the hospital window long after Harper had left, the soft hum of machines whispering in the sterile silence. But his mind was miles away, in a rain-soaked memory, replaying the look in her eyes as she walked away without wanting anything in return. He couldn't shake her presence. The warmth of her touch when she cradled his head, the way she had stayed through the night, the tremble in her voice when she'd begged him to stay alive. For a man who had learned to see the world through contracts and conditions, Harper Quinn was an enigma. And so, after discharging himself earlier than advised, Liam had Cole track her down, not through force or manipulation, but with curiosity that bordered on obsession. He arrived at her modest apartment tucked in a sleepy corner of Denver, where flowers bloomed in chip pots on the windowsill and wind chimes sang soft lullabies to the quiet street. When Harper opened the door and saw him standing there, his arm still in a sling, hair slightly tousled, those unmistakable blue eyes searching her face, she didn't gasp or retreat. She simply blinked and stepped aside, as if she'd somehow known he'd come. Inside, her world was simple: hand-me-down furniture, photos of children she cared for at the hospital, and a scent of lavender that clung to every surface. Liam sat awkwardly on the couch, for once unsure of himself, and told her why he was there, not to repay her with riches or recognition, but to ask if she would be his private nurse during recovery. She hesitated. He could see it in her eyes, the conflict, the walls she'd built around her heart. But then she nodded slowly, not for money, not for glory, but for reasons she couldn't yet name, drawn by a pull she didn't understand. And so, their days began together. Harper moved into the guest suite of his sprawling penthouse overlooking the city skyline, where marble floors and glass walls reflected a life far removed from hers. But she adjusted with grace, tending to his bandages, preparing his meals, reminding him to slow down and breathe. Liam found her presence soothing, her laughter soft but healing, and he caught himself listening at doors just to hear it again. But he also noticed the shadows behind her smile, the way her gaze lingered on children in the park below, or how she sometimes clutched a silver locket around her neck, like it anchored her soul. He wanted to ask, but something told him not to rush. And yet Harper watched him too, not as the billionaire the world adored, but as a man trying to rebuild from ashes. She saw the loneliness in his silences, the way his fingers twitched at night when memories returned, the hunger in his eyes for something real, something untouched by betrayal. As days turned into weeks, Liam found that healing wasn't just physical. Her presence stitched the holes in his soul. And still, Harper carried her secret like a flame in the wind, fragile, flickering, but never fully extinguished. A night from years ago haunted her, a choice made in kindness, desperation, and hope. She had been younger then, working part-time to pay for her nursing school, volunteering at a fertility clinic in Boulder. There, a chance conversation, a call for anonymous egg donors to help couples battling infertility, had changed the course of her life. She had done it with no expectations, her identity sealed by confidentiality, her heart at peace knowing she had helped someone she would never meet. But now, as she stood in the echoing halls of Liam Westbrook's estate, something gnawed at her gut every time she looked into his eyes. Those same blue eyes she'd seen mirrored once before, in a clinic's profile, years ago. It couldn't be. Could it? She remembered the donor form he must never know about, the file, the date, the man marked sterile by fate, now sitting inches away from a truth that could shatter or bind them forever. And so, Harper smiled through her fear, stitched wounds that weren't hers, and lived each moment with Liam, knowing that one day soon, the secret she carried might change everything. Not just for her, not just for him, but for two innocent lives he never imagined he had a connection to. Twin sons, growing in a world just out of his reach. The days passed with a strange serenity that made Harper's heart ache and Liam's walls soften, but neither knew the quiet before the storm was drawing its breath. Months had gone by since Harper moved into Liam's penthouse, and in that time, Liam found himself living in moments, not memories, savoring the sound of Harper humming while she folded laundry, the soft press of her fingers when she changed his dressings, the way she laughed like someone who hadn't forgotten how to hurt. His recovery had been complete for weeks now, yet he hadn't asked her to leave, and she hadn't brought it up. Something unspoken kept them anchored. Harper, too, had grown used to the echo of his footsteps in the hall, The sight of his bare feet on marble floors, the vulnerable way he leaned on her emotionally when he thought she wasn't watching. Then came the day Liam's company launched a wellness initiative, one that offered cutting-edge genetic health screenings for employees and their close families. It was led by Dr. Jacob Greaves, Liam's longtime friend and a renowned specialist in genome mapping. What began as a PR campaign for corporate responsibility took a personal turn when Jacob joked over dinner. "You should both try it. Might be fun to see what surprises lie in your DNA." Liam, ever the competitor, grinned and agreed. Harper hesitated, but Liam nudged, her playfully teasing that he wanted to see if they were both prone to caffeine addiction. She laughed and relented. They submitted their samples casually, neither aware that their entire reality was hanging by a thread, stitched in double helix strands. A week later, Liam received a call from Jacob. His voice wasn't joking this time. He asked Liam to come alone to the clinic. Confused but intrigued, Liam went, expecting perhaps some rare genetic anomaly or hereditary trait. What he got instead was a blow to the soul. Jacob handed him a printout, its colored graphs and complex symbols, meaningless to most, but the sentence highlighted in yellow made Liam's breath catch. "High genetic alignment consistent with direct biological relation." He blinked at the screen. "What are you saying?" Jacob exhaled, locking eyes with him. "Liam, if these tests are accurate, Harper's twin sons share your DNA. You are their biological father." The room spun. Liam dropped the page, his hands trembling as his mind raced. "That's impossible," he whispered, his throat dry. "I'm sterile. I've always been sterile." Jacob's expression didn't waver. "Not anymore. Or maybe not ever. Maybe the test that told you that was wrong." Liam left the clinic in a daze, his heart pounding like a war drum, his steps robotic as he returned home to find Harper in the kitchen, slicing oranges as if the universe hadn't just changed. She turned and smiled, but that smile faded the moment she saw his face. "Liam?" she asked cautiously. He didn't speak. He simply placed the DNA report on the counter. Her eyes scanned it, and she froze. For a moment, time shattered. Then she sank into the nearest chair, as if the truth had finally caught up to her, and her legs could no longer hold the weight of it. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know it was you." Liam stared at her, his jaw clenched, his heart a battlefield between betrayal and bewilderment. "You have children?" he asked, voice raw. She nodded brokenly. "Twin boys, they're 5. I raised them alone. I never told anyone where they came from. I just said their father was absent." His mind reeled. "And the eggs?" She looked down. "I was in nursing school. I donated them to a fertility clinic for extra money. I had no idea you were the sperm donor. We were just 2 anonymous names in a medical database." Liam stumbled back a step, as though the air had been punched from his lungs. He wasn't childless. He wasn't sterile. He was a father, and had been for years without knowing. Harper's sobs were quiet but agonizing, her hands shaking as she confessed the whole story. How she had volunteered, how she'd hoped to help some couple struggling to conceive, how fate had cruelly, beautifully led them back to each other, entwined in a secret neither had known existed. He wanted to scream. He wanted to leave. But more than anything, he wanted to see those children, his children, whose eyes he had never looked into, whose first steps he had missed, whose laughter had never reached his ears. Harper looked up at him, not begging for forgiveness, but bracing for his judgment. Liam didn't speak. He couldn't. His world had changed again. And this time the wreckage wasn't from a crash, but from a truth so wild, so incomprehensible, it cracked something open in him he hadn't realized still existed. The part of him that longed to be a father, to be part of something real. And now that possibility had a face. Or 2. Liam couldn't shake the whirlpool of emotions spinning in his chest, each wave crashing harder than the last. A week had passed since the DNA test, and he still hadn't fully processed the magnitude of it all. For years he had been told he was sterile, his dream of fatherhood an illusion. Now that very illusion had shattered, and 2 bright-eyed boys, Caleb and Asher, had become the truth he never expected. The confusion inside him was almost too much to bear. Should he be angry for the secret Harper had kept from him? Or should he feel grateful, blessed even, that he wasn't the barren man he thought he was? The emotions were a tidal wave. Grief for what he missed, joy for what he gained, fear for the future, and longing for the connection that had just been unveiled. Without thinking, Liam drove to Harper's apartment, needing to see the boys, to touch the truth that was so close, yet still felt out of reach. When he arrived unannounced, Harper's expression was unreadable as she opened the door, her eyes cautious. But then behind her, he saw them. Caleb and Asher. They were just like him. Same blue eyes, same mischievous grins. But they didn't know him. They didn't recognize the man standing before them as their father. They were too young to understand, too innocent to grasp the gravity of the situation. And yet, in an instant, they ran toward him, excitedly tugging on his sleeves and calling him Uncle Liam. That innocence, those wide eyes hit him harder than he ever expected. His heart clenched as they embraced him, their small hands curling into his arms. The simple gesture, unburdened by guilt or expectation, shattered the icy walls he had spent years constructing around himself. It wasn't just the shock of seeing them. It was the unmistakable pull, the undeniable truth of the bond he had with these children, his sons, his flesh and blood. Liam crouched down to their level, fighting to hold back the overwhelming surge of emotion. He smiled, a little lost in the moment, as Caleb giggled and pointed to his blue eyes, while Asher asked if he could play with them later. He nodded, but the lump in his throat grew. He knew this wasn't just a passing feeling. This was real. He was their father, and there was no taking that back. But in that same moment, he saw the caution in Harper's eyes. She hovered in the background, her arms crossed defensively as she watched Liam interact with the boys. He could feel her hesitation, her fear. She was afraid he would try to take them away from her. She was afraid that now he knew the truth, he would judge her for the secret she had kept all these years. But Liam wasn't angry. Not at her, not at the boys. The anger he thought he should feel had melted away like snow in the spring sun. What was left was a raw, vulnerable truth. He was a father, and he had missed out on so much. But he wasn't going to make that mistake again. Not now, not ever. He turned to Harper, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm not here to take them away from you," he said softly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm here because I want to be part of their lives. I want to be a father." Harper blinked, surprised by his words. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The weight of the moment seemed to hang in the air, thick with unresolved emotions. She had spent years protecting them, guarding her secret, and now here was this man, this CEO, this stranger to them, who had somehow become their father. She couldn't just let go, not so easily. She couldn't just trust him. But Liam wasn't asking for that. He wasn't asking her to hand over the reins. He was simply asking for a chance, for the chance to prove that he wasn't just a CEO, a man locked in the cold, controlled world of business, that he could be more, that he could be a dad. The room fell silent for a moment, the only sound the soft laughter of Caleb and Asher as they continued to tug at his sleeves, eager for his attention. Liam's heart ached, but in a good way. There was something in those little faces that made him feel like he mattered, like he could matter in a way he never had before. Finally, Harper sighed, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world had been lifted, just a little. "You don't know what you're asking for," she said softly, her eyes full of doubt, "but I can't stop you from trying." Liam stepped closer, the boys now circling him, and gently put his hand on her arm. "I don't need you to stop me. I just need you to give me a chance." And just like that, without words, they began a new chapter together, one where trust was built slowly, piece by piece. For Liam, it was a chance to step into the role he had never believed he could fill. And for Harper, it was a risk she was finally ready to take. The weight of the world seemed to settle on Liam's shoulders, heavier than any business challenge he had ever faced. As he tried to rebuild his life with Harper and the twins, the peaceful existence he had imagined was quickly torn apart. Westbrook Enterprises, the company he had worked so hard to build, was under attack. Charlotte Monroe, his former fiancée and a savvy investor, was back, and she had one goal in mind: to take over the company. She publicly labeled Liam as unstable, accusing him of losing focus and being unfit to lead. The accusations were harsh, but the timing was even worse. It wasn't just business anymore. It was personal. Charlotte, sensing an opening, hired private investigators to dig into Harper's past. What they uncovered was far more damaging than Liam had ever anticipated. The tabloids exploded with scandalous headlines. Billionaire's ex-fiance's secret lover exposed. Gold digger behind closed doors. The revelation that Harper had donated her eggs to a fertility clinic years ago, and her financial struggles became public knowledge, sparking a whirlwind of gossip and judgment. The media tore into her, branding her as an opportunist and accusing her of using Liam for money. Harper didn't deserve this. Liam knew it, but in the frenzy, he felt helpless. He watched her face the storm alone, her bravery unwavering as the accusations came pouring in. When the cameras were on her, when everyone expected her to shrink away in shame, Harper stood tall. She didn't falter. With all the strength she could muster, she faced the world and spoke her truth. The words she spoke resonated deeply with Liam, and he couldn't help but feel a swell of admiration for her. "I never chased wealth. I only followed kindness, and it led me to love," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. In that moment, she wasn't just defending herself, she was declaring her own power. Harper's courage, her honesty, silenced the critics and touched the hearts of millions. Liam's eyes welled up as he watched her, his heart aching with pride and guilt. She didn't deserve any of this. She didn't deserve the pain she was going through because of him. That night, after the storm of the media had settled, Liam knew he had to do something bold. Charlotte was dangerous, but she wasn't invincible. He gathered his board members and made a shocking move. He ousted Charlotte Monroe from the company, stripping her of any power she had left in Westbrook Enterprises. It was a small victory, but it was his way of taking back control. As the boardroom doors closed, he didn't hesitate. He had one thing left to do. He found Harper at their apartment, the twins asleep in their room. The weight of the day was still heavy on both their hearts, but Liam knew he had to ask her the question that had been on his mind for weeks. He knelt before her, his heart laid bare. "Will you give me a second chance, as a father and as a man who wants to love you right?" His voice broke slightly, the vulnerability of the moment filling the room. Harper stood frozen, her eyes wide with surprise. Her heart had always been open to him, but this was more than she had ever expected. She had stood strong in the face of judgment and humiliation, but now Liam was offering her something more, something real. The weight of the past few months, the struggle, the pain, they all seemed to fade in that moment. Harper didn't answer immediately, but the look in her eyes was enough. She didn't need to speak. She leaned down, her lips brushing against his, in a kiss that spoke volumes. It was the beginning of something new, a promise that, together, they could face whatever came next hand in hand. Harper's yes wasn't to a grand proposal, but to something much deeper. She opened her heart to the possibility of a future, one that was uncertain yet full of promise. That evening, under the glow of a crackling fire in a quiet mountain cabin Liam had prepared for her and the boys, the world outside seemed far away. The boys were asleep upstairs, their innocent faces peaceful in slumber, leaving Liam and Harper to finally be alone, to speak the words that had been building between them for so long. Wrapped in a thick blanket, sitting side by side on the couch, Harper felt the warmth of Liam beside her, the weight of their past and the uncertainty of their future heavy in the air. But as the flames danced in the hearth, something shifted. Liam took a deep breath, his eyes reflecting the firelight, and his voice was soft but steady. "I never thought I could have this, any of this," he confessed, his words tinged with vulnerability. "For so long I believed I was broken. I convinced myself that I was sterile, that I'd never be a father. But meeting you," he trailed off, his eyes locking with hers. "Meeting you changed everything. You made me believe in life again, in love, in what's possible." Harper's heart ached for him. She saw the raw honesty in his eyes, the same kind of hurt and fear that had once lived in her own heart. Reaching out, she placed her hand gently on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart under her palm. "You were never broken, Liam," she whispered, her voice a quiet reassurance. "You just hadn't found what was meant for you. All the pieces were there. You just needed someone to help you see them." There was silence between them, but it wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that speaks louder than words, the kind that says more than any confession ever could. And then, without a rush, without any expectation, their lips met. It wasn't a kiss driven by desire or passion, but one of healing, of understanding. It was slow and gentle, a soft brush of lips that said everything they needed to say. Liam pulled her closer, his hand resting lightly on her back as their foreheads touched, the warmth between them almost palpable. There was no rush, no pressure, just the quiet peace that came with knowing they had found something real. Something that had grown from the seeds of struggle, patience, and fate. They stayed there for a moment, wrapped in each other's presence, knowing that this was just the beginning. Harper smiled softly against his skin, the simple act of sharing space with him feeling like the greatest gift she could ever receive. They talked, their words soft and intimate, about everything and nothing. They shared their dreams, their fears, the life they wanted to build, not just for the two of them, but for Caleb and Asher. Liam promised to always be there for her, for the boys. Harper promised to never let fear stop her from loving him, from embracing the family they had become. And when the night settled into comfortable silence, they both knew something irrevocable had changed. They weren't perfect, and they had a long road ahead of them, but they were together, more whole than they'd ever been. The night was filled with laughter, shared memories, and whispered promises. It was a night of truth, a night of love, and most importantly, a night that sealed the bond between them in a way nothing else could. For the first time in a long while, Liam felt at peace. For the first time in her life, Harper felt like she belonged. And in the warmth of the cabin, under the soft glow of the fire, they promised each other forever. Months passed, and life had transformed for Harper and Liam in ways neither could have ever imagined. The once empty silence in their hearts was now filled with laughter, love, and the bustling sound of Caleb and Asher's playful chatter. Harper walked down a path lined with wildflowers, her heart swelling with joy as her sons held her hands. Every step she took felt like a dream she never thought would come true. Dreams of family, of love, of a future she'd once believed impossible. And there, at the end of the path, stood Liam. His eyes were fixed on her, his expression one of pride and awe. He had waited for this moment, not just for the wedding, but for the life they had built together. He looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world, and she, in turn, saw a man she could trust completely, a man who had found his way to fatherhood, to love, to a life worth living. They had both been to the edge of despair and now stood at the cusp of something beautiful. The ceremony was intimate, only the closest friends and family gathered. It wasn't extravagant, but there was a quiet magic in the air, a love story written in the stars. Liam's voice cracked as he recited his vows, his words soaked with emotion. "I once believed I had everything, until I had nothing. You gave me life. You gave me sons. But most importantly, you gave me love." Harper's breath caught in her throat as she listened, the weight of his words settling deep within her heart. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a testament to what they had overcome and the family they had built. When she whispered, "I do," fireworks burst into the sky, as if the heavens themselves celebrated their union. Later, beneath the twinkling stars, the twins nestled peacefully between them on a blanket. Harper's heart was full, but there was still one thought that lingered, one she had never dared to speak aloud. Turning to Liam, her voice was barely a whisper. "I never thought love would find me this way." Liam looked down at her, his face softening, eyes full of tenderness. "Fate did more than find us," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It gave us a family." With those words, she felt the final piece of her heart settle into place. Their journey hadn't been easy, but it had been their own, full of unexpected twists, heartaches, and joys. And now, in this moment, They had everything they had ever dreamed of: a family, love, and a future that was finally theirs to write. As the night stretched on, the world seemed to pause, allowing them to savor the quiet magic of the life they had built together. The stars above sparkled brighter, almost as if they were a reflection of the love that now defined their lives. For the first time, Harper knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it as a family, with love and strength that could withstand anything. With Liam by her side, she was home.